June 2013 started like any other summer day for the Perrywinkle family. Rain Perrywinkle, a devoted mother, decided to take her 3 daughters shopping at a nearby Dollar General store. Among them was Cherish, her 3-year-old daughter, a bright and playful child with curly brown hair and an infectious smile that could light up a room. Cherish had the kind of innocence that parents try to protect at all costs, and Rain took comfort in the fact that her girls were safe with her by their side. The store was bustling with other shoppers picking up essentials for the week. It was a familiar scene to Rain, a routine outing meant for a few hours of errands. But fate intervened in the form of a man who appeared polite, generous, and eager to help. His name was Donald James Smith, and he would later be revealed as a dangerous predator, though at that moment he seemed nothing more than a stranger offering a kind gesture. Smith approached Rain, presenting himself as friendly and concerned. He offered to buy clothes for the girls, waving a $150 Walmart gift card. Rain, cautious but trusting, initially hesitated. She did not know this man, yet something about his calm demeanor made him seem harmless. Perhaps she believed in the good of strangers, or perhaps it was simply human nature to give someone the benefit of the doubt. After a brief conversation, Rain agreed to let Smith help. They left Dollar General together and drove to the nearby Walmart. Over the next 2 hours, they wandered the aisles, picking out clothes, shoes, and toys. Cherish, holding onto her mother's hand, remained cheerful and excited by the small adventure. The store cameras would later capture their movements in detail. Every aisle walked, every item touched, every interaction witnessed by the silent eyes of surveillance cameras. The seemingly ordinary outing began to take a dark turn when Smith suggested they grab dinner at the in-store McDonald's. He offered to take Cherish along, claiming he would only be a few minutes and promising a treat for the little girl. Rain, still unaware of his true intentions, agreed. Cherish left the store with him, hand in hand, her trusting smile hiding the danger she would soon face. This simple decision, one that any parent might make on an ordinary evening, marked the last time Cherish was seen alive by her mother. At that moment, the store remained a scene of mundane activity. Other shoppers came and went, oblivious to the horror that had quietly begun to unfold. Smith, who had a history of predatory behavior, had lured Cherish away under the guise of kindness. His actions were methodical, calculated, and cruel, though no one in the store suspected his true motives. Later investigations revealed chilling details about Smith. He was a registered sex offender with a long history of abusing young girls, and he had been released from prison just weeks before the abduction. In hindsight, his approach at Dollar General was a strategic manipulation, preying on a mother's trust and a child's innocence. But at that moment, none of this was apparent. To Rain, he was simply a helpful stranger. To Cherish, he was someone who seemed friendly and fun. The encounter highlighted a terrifying truth. Danger often comes disguised as safety. The ordinary, everyday actions of a parent, trusting someone in a public place, allowing a small detour, handing a child to an adult who seemed kind, can suddenly intersect with a predator's calculated plan. Cherish laughed that evening, the playful tugging of her hand as she followed Smith, and the shared smiles with her mother were the last fragments of normalcy before the unimaginable. Communities across Jacksonville would later be shocked when the full story unfolded. What started as a simple shopping trip became a national news story, an Amber Alert, and a case study in parental vigilance and predator awareness. For Cherish family, that evening marked a pivot from normal life to a nightmare they could never have imagined. Rain Perrywinkle's decisions that day were rooted in trust and hope, the kind of trust parents instinctively give to the world. But predators like Smith exploit that trust with meticulous calculation. The events of that night serve as a sobering reminder. Even in everyday situations, danger can be present in the most unexpected forms. Cherish's story reminds us that vigilance can save lives. Always supervise children in public spaces, educate them about stranger danger, and trust your instincts when something feels off. Stay informed about local safety alerts, and teach your family to prioritize caution. Sharing this knowledge can help prevent tragedies before they occur. Subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories that honor victims and shed light on critical safety lessons. Your support helps us keep these stories alive and encourages communities to stay vigilant. One moment, Cherish Perrywinkle was skipping behind a seemingly kind stranger. The next, she vanished, leaving only fear and confusion in her mother's wake. How could a simple trip turn into a nightmare that would haunt a community forever? Expanded chapter. The ordinary shopping trip at Walmart had taken a terrifying turn. Cherish had walked away from her mother with Donald Smith, trusting him as any innocent child might trust an adult who seemed kind and reassuring. But by the time Rain realized Cherish had gone, every second felt like an eternity. Panic surged as she frantically scanned the aisles, calling out her daughter's name. Her heart raced, and for a moment, disbelief clouded her mind. Could this really be happening? The store was still busy with shoppers, oblivious to the unfolding horror. Rain's eyes darted from aisle to aisle. She spotted a few employees but hesitated to approach, unsure if they would understand the urgency. She tried her phone, dialing 911, but the line was busy or out of range. Every passing minute intensified her fear. Cherish was gone, and with her, a part of Rain's world seemed to vanish. Meanwhile, Donald Smith calmly walked toward his van outside. Surveillance cameras would later show him moving with unsettling composure, a stark contrast to the chaos left behind in the store. Cherish, unaware of the danger, followed along, her trust in him absolute. To a predator like Smith, that trust was a weapon, a key that allowed him to execute his plans without immediate resistance. The first hours were critical. By the time Walmart employees realized what had happened and contacted authorities, precious minutes had been lost. Rain described the man in his vehicle, giving police every detail she could remember. The van, a white Dodge with white curtains, would become central to the investigation. Officers scoured the area, but Smith had already vanished into the night, taking Cherish with him. It didn't take long for investigators to uncover Smith's dark past. A convicted sex offender with a history dating back decades, he had recently been released from prison. Despite warnings from psychiatric evaluators and recommendations for civil commitment, he had slipped through the cracks. Now, he posed an immediate threat, and the urgency of finding Cherish escalated. Law enforcement issued an Amber Alert just before midnight, mobilizing community and local media. The following hours were a blur of activity. 9 units scoured nearby areas. Helicopters circled overhead, and officers checked parking lots, abandoned buildings, and surrounding streets. Tips poured in from concerned citizens who had spotted the white van, some reporting suspicious activity near churches, parks, and residential areas. Each lead, however small, was treated with the gravity of the situation. Every minute that passed without Cherish heightened the risk to her safety. At home, Rain's despair deepened. She was terrified for Cherish, haunted by the realization that the stranger she had trusted had intentions far darker than she could have imagined. Her younger daughters, Destiny and Na, clung to her, confused and scared by the sudden chaos. Friends and neighbors tried to offer support, but no words could ease the terror of a mother who could not find her child. The breakthrough came in the early hours of the morning. A tip led officers to a white van parked behind a church, just a few miles from the Walmart. When they arrived, Smith was inside, soaking wet, a sign of the dark path his actions had taken. Items from the store were found inside the vehicle, but Cherish was not there. Something told the officer on the scene that they needed to search the nearby water. Within 20 minutes, behind the church, the small, tragic form of Cherish was found. Her body lay partially submerged in a creek, her hair floating in the water, and her bright floral dress nearby. The discovery shocked the community. The horror of what had happened was almost impossible to comprehend. Investigators documented the scene carefully, gathering evidence to piece together Smith's movements and actions. Medical examiners would later reveal the brutality of the crime. Blunt force trauma, signs of strangulation, and other injuries indicating the cruelty Cherish had endured. Smith was arrested immediately, showing no emotion or remorse. In custody, he remained silent with law enforcement, but spoke freely with his mother and fellow inmates. His words revealed a chilling awareness of his actions, contradicting any notion of innocence or ignorance. He admitted to being high and intoxicated, to panicking, and to believing that the only solution was to kill Cherish. His confessions confirmed what investigators already suspected. This was no random act. It was a deliberate crime of a predator with a long history of offending against children. The aftermath of Cherish's disappearance and death left an indelible mark on Jacksonville. Families were reminded of the dangers lurking behind the veneer of ordinary life. Parents questioned their decisions. Schools reviewed safety procedures, and community groups mobilized to educate children and adults about stranger danger. Cherish's story became a cautionary tale about vigilance, trust, and the consequences of systemic failures that allowed someone like Smith to be free. Rain's grief was compounded by anger and frustration at the system that failed to protect her child. Warnings about Smith's dangerousness had existed for years, yet he was able to commit one of the most heinous crimes imaginable. For Cherish's family, justice was not immediate, and the pain was ongoing. Each day was a battle to process the loss, honor Cherish's memory, and advocate for changes to prevent similar tragedies. Cherish's story is a painful reminder that predators can hide in plain sight. Always supervise your children. Trust your instincts and educate your family about potential dangers. Share this story to raise awareness. And subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories that honor victims and shed light on critical safety lessons. Your support helps us keep these stories alive and encourages communities to stay vigilant. When a child vanishes, every second counts. But what happens when the suspect isn't just a stranger, but a known predator with a long history of abuse? The search for Cherish Perrywinkle would reveal chilling truths about trust, oversight, and the lengths some will go to escape justice. The morning after Cherish's disappearance, the city of Jacksonville was gripped by fear and confusion. Law enforcement agencies coordinated an unprecedented response. The Amber Alert had already mobilized hundreds of residents, volunteers, and local media, all desperate to locate the 8-year-old girl. Police officers went door to door, questioning neighbors and gathering every shred of information about Donald Smith and the white van he had been seen driving. Smith's history became a crucial focus for investigators. Decades of disturbing behavior painted a portrait of a man who had never stopped preying on children. He had served multiple prison sentences for offenses targeting minors, and evaluators had repeatedly deemed him too dangerous for release. Yet, somehow, the system had failed to keep him contained. Now, that failure had cost Cherish her life. Detectives studied Smith's previous offenses, from attempted abduction to lewd acts against young girls. They pieced together patterns, identifying methods he had used in the past to gain trust, exploit vulnerability, and manipulate families. Smith had a calculated way of presenting himself as a trustworthy adult, often using small acts of kindness, such as offering money or gifts, to create a false sense of security. To an unsuspecting mother like Rain, he appeared as a helper, someone to be trusted, until the truth emerged. At the crime scene behind the church, investigators meticulously documented evidence. Every detail mattered. The items from Walmart left in the van, Smith's wet clothing suggesting proximity to the creek, tire tracks, footprints, and other trace evidence. Officers scoured the surrounding area for additional clues, while K-9 units and forensic teams searched nearby woods and waterways, hoping to reconstruct the events leading up to Cherish's death. Meanwhile, Rain and her family were thrust into a world of media scrutiny. Local news outlets covered every development, broadcasting images of the missing child, updates on the investigation, and interviews with family members. Each news segment brought a mixture of hope and dread. Families across the city empathized with Rain's agony, while police urged anyone with information come forward immediately. A breakthrough came quickly. Witnesses reported seeing Smith near the church the night of the disappearance. Combined with surveillance footage from Walmart, authorities were able to track his movements and confirm his presence at the scene. Officers quickly located the van and discovered it abandoned, containing personal items belonging to Cherish. This evidence confirmed the worst fears. She had been abducted and likely harmed. The discovery of Cherish's body was both heartbreaking and galvanizing for investigators. Her bright floral dress and floating hair were haunting reminders of the tragedy, and her young life had ended in unimaginable cruelty. Autopsy reports revealed blunt force trauma and severe strangulation injuries, confirming the brutality of the crime. Investigators now had both motive and method, allowing them to focus entirely on bringing Smith to justice. Donald Smith was arrested without incident. His demeanor was cold and emotionless, a chilling contrast to the panic and grief surrounding him. In custody, He initially refused to speak with law enforcement, yet secretly recorded conversations and statements revealed a disturbing awareness of his actions. Smith had calculated his moves, understanding the risks, yet believing he could evade consequences. His admissions during these private moments expose a man who had not only planned the abduction, but rationalized the murder. As the investigation continued, detectives unearthed Smith's repeated offenses spanning decades. His history revealed attempts to impersonate social workers, targeting vulnerable children, and engaging in manipulative behaviors designed to elude detection. These patterns underscored a terrifying reality. Smith was not a one-time offender, but a serial predator who had exploited systemic gaps to continue harming children. Law enforcement also examined the failures that allowed him to be free. Recommendations for civil commitment had been ignored, evaluations of risk overlooked, and a combination of legal loopholes had enabled his release. The system had warned repeatedly that he posed a high danger, yet those warnings went unheeded. Cherish's death became a tragic example of what can happen when warning signs are disregarded, fueling public outrage and calls for reform. Throughout the investigation, the community's support for Cherish's family was unwavering. Volunteers assisted police with searches, provided emotional support for Rain, and helped raise awareness about child safety. Social media campaigns circulated images and information, reminding families everywhere of the importance of vigilance and awareness. The loss of Cherish became a shared sorrow, one that ignited both grief and determination to prevent future tragedies. Smith's legal situation grew increasingly complex. His prior criminal record and ongoing investigations highlighted the severity of his actions. Prosecutors gathered extensive documentation of past offenses, witness statements, and forensic evidence to build a case that would not only secure conviction, but also ensure Smith would never harm another child. Legal experts emphasized the importance of meticulous casework, knowing that any errors could allow a man so dangerous to slip through the cracks again. For Rain, the investigation was as much about justice as it was about closure. She endured the emotional toll of recounting traumatic details, cooperating with police, and witnessing media coverage that relived the nightmare daily. Yet she remained determined, advocating for her daughter and highlighting the systemic failures that enabled Smith to remain free. Her voice became an instrument of awareness, reminding the public that the safety of children must always be prioritized over bureaucracy or oversight lapses. As the investigation progressed, law enforcement pieced together the timeline with precision. Every phone call, movement, and interaction involving Smith was analyzed to understand his plan and intent. Detectives worked tirelessly, motivated by the knowledge that bringing Smith to justice would honor Cherish's memory and prevent him from victimizing others. The investigation into Cherish Perrywinkle's murder reveals how crucial vigilance, community involvement, and systemic accountability are in protecting our children. Share this story to raise awareness, and subscribe to our channel to follow every development in real-life true crime cases. By subscribing, you help keep these stories alive and ensure that victims like Cherish are never forgotten. When the predator is caught, the courtroom becomes a battlefield, not just for justice, but for the soul of a community shaken to its core. The trial of Donald Smith was about to begin, and every detail, every testimony, would reopen wounds and demand accountability. The day Donald Smith's trial opened, the atmosphere outside the courthouse was tense. News crews lined the streets. Families gathered with flowers, and supporters of Cherish Perrywinkle's family waited in quiet anticipation. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with subdued urgency. Lawyers reviewed notes, the judge arranged documents, and jurors were called one by one, asked to set aside personal beliefs and biases in service of the law. For Rain, Cherish's mother, the trial was both daunting and necessary. The memories of that fateful night remained fresh, unhealed, and the thought of recounting them in front of strangers, alongside the man who had taken her daughter, was terrifying. Yet, she understood the importance of bearing witness. Her testimony would be crucial to securing justice, not just for Cherish, but for every child who could be protected by the outcome. The prosecution opened with a stark narrative, painting a detailed picture of the night Cherish vanished. They described the Dollar General store, the warmth of Donald Smith's approach, the gentle words that disguised his dangerous intentions, and the trust that Rain had placed in him. Every moment was presented with painstaking clarity, Emphasizing the vulnerability of the child and the premeditated nature of the crime, prosecutors didn't shy away from Smith's history. They presented records of his prior convictions, attempts at manipulation, and previous interactions with law enforcement. The jury was reminded that Smith had been evaluated as a high-risk offender, yet had been released, creating a deadly opportunity that cost Cherish her life. Evidence included security footage, witness statements, and forensic analysis that reconstructed the timeline of abduction and murder. Each piece painted a portrait of a man fully aware of his actions and the danger he posed. The defense, on the other hand, attempted to shift focus. They questioned Rain's decisions, highlighting the mother's momentary trust in a stranger and suggesting her choices contributed to the tragedy. Their strategy was controversial, bordering on victim blaming, but it was a calculated attempt to sway jurors away from focusing solely on Smith's actions. Yet, in the face of overwhelming evidence, their arguments struggled to gain traction. Witnesses took the stand, recounting details that were both meticulous and heart-wrenching. Store employees described Smith's interactions with the family, noting the one unsettling purchase, a length of rope. Neighbors reported seeing the van parked suspiciously near the church. Officers described discovering Cherish's body, the shocking reality of her injuries, and the immediate steps taken to secure the crime scene. Forensic experts walked jurors through the autopsy results, explaining the blunt force trauma and severe strangulation injuries, each detail underscoring the brutality of the crime. Throughout the proceedings, Smith remained largely silent. His legal team presented few defenses and offered no witnesses, relying instead on procedural objections and attempts to shift blame subtly. Smith's presence, emotionless and detached, contrasted sharply with the raw grief and emotion displayed by Rain and the community. In private recordings obtained by authorities, Smith had admitted to his actions, describing the abduction and murder in chillingly calm detail. These recordings became a silent, damning witness in the courtroom, confirming what the jury already suspected. The emotional weight of the trial was profound. Jurors were shown graphic evidence, compelled to confront the horror of a child suffering in detail. The courtroom was often quiet with tension, punctuated by moments where witnesses paused, overcome by the weight of their testimony. Rain's account was particularly devastating. She described Cherish skipping behind Smith toward the McDonald's, never imagining it would be the last time she saw her daughter alive. Her grief was palpable, her courage undeniable. Community response extended beyond the courtroom. Supporters rallied outside, offering prayers, flowers, and messages of solidarity. Social media channels amplified the story, highlighting both the failures that allowed Smith to remain free and the resilience of a grieving mother seeking justice. Awareness campaigns emphasized the importance of vigilance, reporting suspicious behavior, and advocating for protection of children everywhere. Legal experts monitored the trial closely. They noted the complexity of prosecuting someone with Smith's criminal history, emphasizing the need to balance the admissibility of prior convictions with the risk of prejudicing the jury. The prosecution's careful presentation of evidence ensured that Smith's past informed, but did not overshadow, the specifics of Cherish murder. Each legal argument, objection, and decision contributed to a meticulous pursuit of justice, leaving little room for error. The trial also exposed systemic vulnerabilities. Jurors and observers alike were confronted with the reality that Smith had slipped through the cracks multiple times. Civil commitment recommendations had been ignored, evaluations overlooked, and prior offenses had failed to prevent him from harming another child. This revelation fueled public outrage and became a central theme in advocacy discussions, the need to reform systems that failed to protect the most vulnerable. As the trial continued, the narrative remained consistent. A young girl's life stolen by a predator who had been identified as high risk long before the crime. Each testimony, piece of evidence, and procedural maneuver reinforced the same conclusion. The man standing trial was fully responsible for Cherish's death. By the end of the first week, jurors had been immersed in the details of abduction, manipulation, and murder, facing the unimaginable weight of determining justice for a child who could never speak for herself. The trial of Donald Smith reminds us all of the importance of vigilance, systemic accountability, and community action. Subscribe to our channel to follow this case and others like it, and share this story to raise awareness about protecting our children. By staying informed, You honor victims like Cherish and help ensure that predators are held accountable. After months of harrowing testimony and emotional testimony, the courtroom waited for a single question to be answered. Would justice finally be served for Cherish Perrywinkle? The answer would shake the city, affect countless lives, and offer a glimpse of closure to a grieving mother. The courtroom was heavy with anticipation as the final phase of the trial began. Jurors had spent days listening to chilling accounts of Cherish abduction and murder, carefully weighing every piece of evidence, every witness statement, and every minute detail. Outside, news crews prepared to broadcast updates. Families gathered quietly, and the community braced for what many fear will be a life-altering moment in Jacksonville's history. Rain Perrywinkle sat at the front row, her hands gripping the edge of the wooden bench, her knuckles white with tension. The memories of that night, the Dollar General store, the van, the fleeting trust placed in a stranger, flashed vividly in her mind. Every testimony, every photograph, every video clip had reopened her deepest wounds. Yet she remained resolute. She had come to testify not only for her daughter, but for every child who could be saved if the man responsible was held accountable. The prosecution presented their closing arguments with meticulous precision. They recounted Donald Smith's history of violence and predation, emphasizing his documented risk to the public. They reminded the jury of the abduction, the horrific assault, and the murder of an innocent child. They highlighted the system's failures, the ignored warnings, and the unheeded recommendations for civil commitment. Every point was underscored with evidence and witness testimony, leaving a clear picture of guilt and malice. Smith's defense team had little to counter. They had relied on procedural arguments and attempts to question Rain's choices, but the weight of overwhelming evidence made their strategy appear futile. Throughout the proceedings, Smith remained largely emotionless, his gaze distant, disconnected from the devastating reality around him. In private recordings, he had admitted to his crime, his chilling confessions reinforcing the prosecution's case. Yet in court, he offered no apology, no explanation, no remorse. As the jury began deliberations, tension in the courtroom was palpable. Observers whispered quietly, some pressing hands to their mouths in shock at the thought of the verdict. For Rain, each tick of the clock felt like an eternity. She could only hope that the jurors would recognize the gravity of the crime, the pattern of predation, and the devastating consequences of letting a dangerous man walk free. After what felt like hours, the jury returned. The foreperson rose and announced a verdict with a voice that carried the weight of the truth. Guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, kidnapping of a child under 13, and assault of a person under 12. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of relief, grief, and tears. Rain's shoulders sagged as sobs racked her body. Justice, however imperfect, had been acknowledged. The next phase, sentencing, brought another level of intensity. The jury had to determine whether Smith would face life in prison or the death penalty. Prosecutors presented a detailed review of Smith's past crimes, prior attempts at kidnapping, and disturbing behaviors that highlighted a lifelong pattern of predation. Witnesses described the trauma he had inflicted on other victims, including Carrie Ann, who had narrowly escaped abduction at age 13. The jury was reminded that this was not an isolated crime, but the culmination of decades of unaddressed danger. Smith's defense again presented few arguments. They stressed the challenges of media influence and public opinion, arguing that the man had been portrayed unfairly. They emphasized mental health issues, substance abuse, and an alleged lack of intent in some actions, but the overwhelming evidence of premeditation and prior offenses left these claims nearly invisible against a damning record. Finally, after days of deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous decision: death. The judge confirmed the verdict, emphasizing the severity of the crime and the danger Smith had posed not just to Cherish, but to society at large. Donald James Smith, the judge, intoned, "You have forfeited your right to live among us. You have forfeited your right to life. May God have mercy on your soul." Outside the courthouse, the community reacted in a mixture of relief, anger, and reflection. Crowds gathered, some holding signs advocating for stricter measures to protect children, while others protested against the death penalty, creating a complex, emotional scene. Jurors spoke anonymously, describing the difficulty of balancing the graphic evidence with the need to reach a just decision. Many acknowledged that the images and details of Cherish's suffering would remain with them indefinitely. For Rain, the verdict brought a measure of closure, but it was not the end of her pain. Her surviving daughters, Destiny and Na, were still under state supervision and far from her care. The personal toll of grief, public scrutiny, and ongoing custody battles created a layered trauma that extended far beyond the courtroom. She knew that while Smith's punishment was deserved, it could never bring Cherish back or erase the suffering endured by her family. Legal experts used the trial to examine systemic issues. Smith had been released just 3 weeks before the murder, despite a history of dangerous behavior. Civil commitment recommendations had been ignored. Prior offenses had not prompted sufficient preventive action, and gaps in oversight allowed a predator to strike again. The case became a reference point for discussions on improving the monitoring of high-risk offenders, ensuring that dangerous individuals could not easily slip through procedural cracks. As the legal proceedings concluded, Smith began the appeals process. His attorneys argued ineffective representation and flawed jury selection, but courts consistently upheld the original verdict, emphasizing the clarity of evidence and the irrefutable guilt demonstrated during trial. Meanwhile, Rain continued her advocacy, speaking publicly about system failures and the importance of safeguarding children, determined that Cherish's story would inspire change. Cherish Perrywinkle's tragic story reminds us that vigilance, awareness, and action are critical in protecting children. Subscribe to our channel to follow the ongoing aftermath of this case and others like it. Share this story to raise awareness, advocate for stronger protections, and ensure that predators are held accountable. By staying informed, you honor Cherish's memory and help prevent future tragedies. Even after the verdict and sentencing, the ripple effects of Cherish Perrywinkle's murder continued to touch countless lives. For her family, the community, and the justice system, the story was far from over. How does a city heal after such a tragedy? And how can we ensure that a child like Cherish is never lost again? The quiet streets of Jacksonville carried an unspoken weight after the trial concluded. Cherish Perrywinkle's name was on everyone's lips, and the sorrow was shared across neighborhoods, workplaces, and schools. Rain Perrywinkle, still grappling with the unthinkable loss of her daughter, tried to find fragments of normalcy in a life shattered by grief. Yet, every corner of her existence reminded her of what had been taken: her laughter, her innocence, her light. While the legal system had provided a measure of justice with the sentencing of Donald Smith, the process had only highlighted systemic failures. Smith had been released just weeks before committing this horrendous act, despite warnings from psychiatric evaluators and state officials. Civil commitment recommendations had been overlooked, gaps in supervision had left children vulnerable, and repeated minor offenses had gone unheeded. Experts in law enforcement and child protection began using Cherish's case as a blueprint for reform, advocating for stricter monitoring of high-risk offenders and better communication between agencies. Rain's personal struggle continued as she fought to reunite with her surviving daughters, Destiny and Na. The two girls had been placed with relatives in Australia, far from their mother, due to ongoing evaluations by the Department of Children and Families. Each phone call, each supervised visitation, was a reminder of the fractured family unit, a painful echo of the loss they had already endured. Rain tirelessly navigated bureaucratic processes, legal hurdles, and emotional strain, determined to maintain a connection with her remaining children. The public response to Cherish's story was immense. Hundreds attended her funeral, a gathering that reflected the collective grief of the community. Strangers offered support in tangible ways: groceries, gifts, letters of condolence, demonstrating that even amidst tragedy, human compassion endured. Social media campaigns, advocacy groups, and local organizations mobilized to raise awareness about child safety, predator tracking, and community vigilance. Cherish's life, brief as it had been, became a catalyst for change. Yet, the emotional toll on Rain was profound. She faced scrutiny, judgment, and criticism, sometimes feeling blame for decisions she had made under duress. Employers hesitated to hire her, and some friends drifted away, unable to cope with the public attention surrounding the case. She battled depression and anxiety, learning to navigate a world that seemed intent on reopening her wounds while simultaneously celebrating her resilience. Therapy, community support, and her unwavering determination to fight for her children became her anchors in this storm. Donald Smith remained on death row, a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked predation. Appeals and legal maneuverings continued, but courts consistently reaffirmed the original verdict, citing overwhelming evidence of guilt. In private, recordings of Smith revealed a disturbing self-awareness of his actions, further emphasizing the calculated nature of his crimes. For many, the knowledge that he would never be free offered some relief, yet it did little to fill the void left by Cherish's absence. Meanwhile, child protection agencies and policymakers revisited the gaps exposed by the case. Enhanced monitoring protocols, improved background checks, and stricter guidelines for civil commitment were discussed at state and national levels. Lawmakers considered reforms that would ensure predators with a history of offenses could not slip through the cracks, particularly when children's safety was at risk. The tragic loss of Cherish became a rallying point for advocacy, highlighting the urgent need for systemic vigilance and accountability. Cherish's surviving sisters, Destiny and Na, began building new lives with their aunt in Australia. Though the transition was difficult, they received a sense of stability, love, and protection that had been disrupted by their mother's grief and the state's interventions. Rain continued to fight for her rights as a mother, attending court hearings, providing updates on her life, and maintaining a constant presence in their hearts despite the physical distance. Each small milestone, video calls, letters, supervised visits, was a reminder of her unyielding bond with her children. The legacy of Cherish Perrywinkle extended beyond her immediate family. Schools incorporated lessons on stranger danger and child safety. Community groups organized awareness campaigns, and local authorities prioritized rapid response protocols for abduction cases. Her story became a cautionary tale, a poignant reminder of the importance of vigilance, empathy, and swift action when children are at risk. Every policy change, every community effort, every preventive measure bore the imprint of her brief but impactful life. Rain often reflected on the duality of her experience, the unbearable pain of loss alongside the drive to transform tragedy into meaningful change. She spoke at events, shared her story on platforms advocating for child safety, and connected with other families who had endured similar horrors. Her voice became a guiding force, transforming grief into advocacy, despair into determination. Cherish light, though extinguished far too soon, continued to illuminate paths toward awareness, protection, and reform in the community. The memory of Cherish Perrywinkle became a symbol of resilience and the necessity of vigilance. Parents spoke openly with their children. Educators reinforced lessons on personal safety, and citizens remained alert to suspicious behaviors. The tragedy had shaken the foundations of trust, but also inspired a renewed commitment to protect the most vulnerable. Cherish's story, told and retold, served as a constant reminder that awareness, action, and compassion could save lives. Cherish's story is a stark reminder of the consequences when predators exploit weaknesses in systems meant to protect the innocent. While justice has been served for Donald Smith, the long-term impact on families, communities, and public policy continues to unfold. Cherish's name endures, her story a call for vigilance, reform, and unwavering commitment to child safety. Her life, though brief, left a legacy that continues to resonate, inspiring change and demanding accountability. If Cherish Perrywinkle's story touched you, honor her memory by staying informed and proactive. Subscribe to our channel for ongoing updates on true crime cases, safety awareness tips, and the stories of victims whose voices must be heard. Share this video to raise awareness, support advocacy for child protection, and help ensure no child is ever left unprotected. Together, we can turn tragedy into meaningful action.